The divorce papers came by email while I was still in the desert. 13 years of marriage reduced to a PDF attachment. My name's Nathan. I'm 42, a staff sergeant with the 82nd Airborne. I'd been in Kandahar 4 months when Becky pulled the plug. The subject line hit like a punch. Let's be adults about this. The body? Just 3 sentences. She'd already filed. Already cleared out our joint account. Already moved her new boyfriend, Jeremy, into our house in Spokane. I read it twice, shut the laptop, took a silent shower in the communal stall, got dressed, went on shift, didn't say a word. That night, back at my bunk, I typed one word in reply. Understood. No fight, no pleading, no threats, just the end. Wilson, my bunkmate, caught the shift in the air. "You good, man?" he asked, eyes still on his book. "Yeah," I said. "Just some stuff back home." He nodded. And that was that. Military guys get it. Sometimes silence says enough. Truth is, I wasn't shocked. 6 months before deployment, the cracks had started. Subtle at first. Becky stopped asking about my day. Started working late at the dental office. Hitting the gym 3 times a week. Never breaking a sweat. New clothes. New friends I never met. New passwords on her phone. I didn't press. Didn't snoop. That's not who I am. But I'm not stupid either. I took steps. Quiet ones. I rented a storage unit across town. Tucked away our important documents. Birth certificate, marriage license, the house deed with only my name on it thanks to the VA loan. All the military paperwork. I stashed my grandfather's watch. My mom's old silver. The things that mattered. I also opened a new bank account and started sliding a portion of my pay over. Small enough to go unnoticed, but enough to make sure I wouldn't be left with nothing if the bottom fell out. The night before I deployed, she hugged me at the airport. Said, "Stay safe, okay?" Her eyes were bone dry, like she was saying goodbye to a colleague, not a husband going to war. I should have known then. Part of me did. But I still held on to that last flicker of hope. I wasn't caught off guard. What Becky didn't know was that I'd been ready for this. And what she never understood, never really saw, is that I don't start fights. But I damn sure finish them. We met back in 2010, at a barbecue thrown by a buddy of mine while I was home between tours. I was crashing at Jason's place in Spokane. Becky was wrapping up nursing school, though she wound up working admin at a dental office instead. "Less stress," she'd said with a shrug. We were married 8 months later. She used to tell me she was proud of my service, but I don't think she ever fully grasped it. Her world was different. Her dad managed a bank. Her brother counted pills behind a pharmacy counter. Nobody in uniform. So when she'd ask, "When are you going to get a real job?" she didn't understand. This wasn't something I was just passing time with. 15 years in the Army was my career. My calling. We bought the house in 2014. Modest. 3 bedrooms, a little yard, quiet street. My name was the only one on the mortgage, the VA loan was mine, but I added her to the deed. Because that's what married people do, right? They share. My dad passed a year after the wedding. Heart gave out while shoveling snow. My mom followed 3 years later, lung cancer, even though she never smoked. They left me enough to pay off Becky's student loans. Enough for a cushion we could breathe on. I deployed 4 times during our marriage, 2 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. And every time I came home, Becky seemed a little more elsewhere. Like the life we'd built was starting to feel like a costume she didn't want to wear anymore. "I didn't sign up to be a military wife," she told me once, when I mentioned maybe re-upping for another 4 years. "I'm tired of being alone all the time." And I got it. I really did. But the Army, it was the only place I'd ever felt truly needed. Where I fit. I was good at it. People counted on me. Then 2019 hit, and the shift became impossible to ignore. Started small. Becky snapping when I called during her girls' nights. Dropping comments about her friend Melissa, the one who left her husband and was now living her best life. Saying things like, "We don't even have anything in common anymore." I brought up counseling. She brushed it off. "We're fine," she said. "It's just a phase." Then came the late nights. The weekends away. The strangers' names, the new clothes, the gym she rarely seemed to use. I should have confronted her, but I didn't. That's not my way. My dad taught me better than that. Think before you speak. Be sure before you act. So I watched. And I waited, quietly preparing, because something in my gut told me the storm was coming. And in this life, you learn to trust your gut. 2 weeks after the divorce email, I was sitting in the mess hall, halfway through a lukewarm tray of eggs, when my phone buzzed. A notification from our bank. Another withdrawal, $8,500 this time. Nearly everything that was left. I set my fork down, opened the banking app. The joint account showed $212.37. Our savings, 47 grand, years of discipline and sacrifice, was gone. Transferred to some account I didn't recognize. Murphy glanced over from across the table. Bad news. I locked my phone. Nah, just some account stuff. That night, I made the call from the base phone center. The bank rep told me Becky had been moving money for weeks. Small drips at first, then bigger waves. The large transfers started the day after I deployed. I hung up and stood there in the hallway, staring at nothing while the world spun on around me. Guys were laughing, FaceTiming their kids, talking to wives and parents. Life was still happening for everyone else. Mine was burning to the ground. Wilson found me there. Heard from Alvarez you looked like you'd seen a ghost at dinner, he said. What's going on? I don't usually open up, but Wilson had pulled me out of the fire once, back in Kandahar. I owed him more than silence. My wife drained our accounts, moved her boyfriend into our house, sent divorce papers while I was on patrol. He didn't give me the usual pity lines. No, I'm sorry, or you'll bounce back, or she didn't deserve you. Just a quiet, direct question. What's your plan? Not sure yet. He nodded. Let me know if you need anything. That night, sleep was out of the question. I opened my laptop, logged into our home security system. Something Becky probably forgot I could still access. And there it was. A strange truck in the driveway. A man I didn't recognize walking our dog. Drinking from my coffee mug, wearing my Seahawks sweatshirt. Becky laughing in the kitchen I'd remodeled by hand. Every tile, every cabinet, done on my last leave. Something shifted. Not rage. Not sadness. Something colder. Sharper. Like a switch flipping. I closed the laptop, grabbed my phone, and started making a list. Call James. My old army buddy turned lawyer. Review VA loan terms. Contact Master Sergeant about emergency leave. Dig up those refinance documents Becky mentioned in passing last year. Double-check the security on my pension accounts. I didn't feel heartbroken. I didn't feel betrayed. I felt focused, like I was prepping for a mission. No emotion, just execution. At 0500 before my shift, I sent James an email. Subject line, need legal help. Discreet and urgent. An hour later, his reply came through. Call me. Secure line only. When I hung up the phone, everything locked into place. No shouting. No threats. I didn't need a confrontation, I just had to wait. Watch. Let her walk straight into the consequences she'd built for herself. 2 months later, I was back on U.S. soil. I didn't tell Becky I was coming home. No call. No warning. I checked into a motel in downtown Spokane under a different name and called James. We met at a diner 10 miles outside of town. He slid into the booth across from me and said, "You look like hell. Feel like it too," I said. He handed me a folder thick with documents. Got everything we discussed. Inside, our house deed, VA loan records, full bank statements. Then he pulled out a separate page. This one's interesting. It was a refinance application with what looked like my signature. Except it wasn't. Not quite. The middle initial was wrong. The strokes were off. Someone had tried to mimic it and failed. Becky did this? I asked, but I already knew. James nodded. 3 months ago, she pulled 30 grand from the equity. That's fraud, I said. VA loans in my name. She needed my signature. Not just that, James added. She listed her boyfriend as co-applicant. The guy's got a record. 2 DUIs and a fraud charge in 19. I took a long breath. What are my options? James didn't flinch. Plenty. But first, you need to decide what you want. I thought about it. I want what's mine, and I want her to learn what consequences feel like. He gave me a slow smile. Then here's what we do. The next morning, I drove past the house. Her boyfriend's truck wasn't there, but Becky's car was in the driveway. I parked down the street, engine idling, just watching. For a moment, I considered walking up, knocking, demanding answers. But that wasn't the mission. Instead, I drove to the bank, met with the loan officer who'd processed the refinance. I showed him my military ID, my driver's license, the clean, authentic version of my signature, then held it up beside the forgery. He went pale. I'll have to report this immediately. I understand, I said. I've already filed a police report. That night, a text lit up my phone. It was Becky. Who've you been talking to at the bank? Becky texted. Jeremy said someone was asking questions. I didn't reply. The next morning, I went down to the county clerk's office. Filed paperwork contesting the refinance on grounds of fraud. Registered a formal notice. No changes could be made to the property without me present. 2 days later, Becky called. I let it roll to voicemail. Nathan, we need to talk, her voice said, tight with panic. The bank called about the house. What are you doing? If this is about the divorce, we can discuss it like adults. Like adults. Same line from the email. Same hollow civility. I didn't answer. That afternoon, James called. The bank froze the refinance funds. And there's more, your wife's boyfriend's been driving your truck, right? The one still in your name. Yeah. He got pulled over this morning. Driving on a suspended license from those DUIs. Truck's been impounded. Good, I said. Also, they found some interesting stuff in it. Prescription pads. From the dental office Becky works at. They weren't blank. I closed my eyes. She's been stealing prescription pads? Looks that way. Police are opening an investigation. I hung up and sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the cheap wallpaper like it held answers. This wasn't just a messy divorce anymore. It was spiraling into something criminal. A part of me wanted to call her, warn her. Old reflexes from the man I used to be. But then I pictured the security footage again. My house, my dog, my life, gift-wrapped and handed to someone else like it meant nothing. No, that part of me was done. This was the path now. No turning back. And truthfully, I didn't want to. The next morning, I met with the bank's fraud investigator, Thompson. Short guy, tired eyes, coffee stain on his tie. This happens more than you'd think, he said, laying out paperwork across his cluttered desk. Spouse deploys. Other spouse sees an opportunity. What happens now? I asked. We've frozen the refinance funds, but there's a problem. Some of it's already gone. How much? About half. $14,600. I leaned in. Where did it go? He hesitated. Technically, I'm not supposed to share that. It's my house, my forged signature, my stolen money. Thompson looked at me for a long second, then nodded, turned his monitor toward me. These are the outgoing transfers. I scanned the list. Multiple payments to someone named Daniel Spencer. Not Jeremy. Someone I'd never even heard of. Who's Daniel Spencer? I asked. Thompson just shrugged. Not my department. But your lawyer can subpoena the records. As soon as I stepped out of the bank, I called James. Daniel Spencer, he repeated. Give me a minute to run a check. An hour later, my phone rang. Got it. He's a real estate agent. Specializes in fast sales. Cash buyers, no questions asked. She was planning to sell our house, I said, and the words hit me like a punch to the chest. Looks that way, James replied. Those deposits? Likely earnest money to kickstart the listing. But here's where it gets interesting. Spencer's worked with Jeremy Ryan before. 3 transactions over the last 2 years. I sank onto a park bench, heart pounding. So this wasn't just Becky leaving me for another guy. This was planned. Could be, James said cautiously. I did some deeper digging on Jeremy. There's a pattern. He gets involved with women going through divorces or ones whose spouses are deployed. He paused. I've found 3 cases so far. Each time, the woman's home sold well below value to one of Spencer's clients. Ryan gets a cut, then disappears. And Becky? I asked. Did she know? Hard to say. Maybe she's a pawn. Or maybe she's in on it. I rubbed my face, trying to breathe through the weight of it all. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a scheme, targeted, methodical. And it wasn't just me. Other military families had been pulled into this web. What do we do? I asked. I've already looped in the FBI, James said. Financial Crimes Division. This touches state lines, military housing, VA loans. It's on their radar now. That night, I sat in my motel room with a beer, the silence thick around me. I kept thinking, had Becky been playing me since day one? Or did she just fall into the wrong hands? Did it matter? My phone buzzed again. Becky. Nathan, please call me. The bank mentioned fraud, and Jeremy got arrested driving your truck. I don't understand what's happening. I stared at the message, then typed, "Who is Daniel Spencer?" 3 dots appeared, then vanished, then reappeared, then vanished again. Finally, her response came through. I don't know what you're talking about. 14,600. I typed. Multiple transfers. House listing. No response. 10 minutes passed in silence. Then it's not what you think. I turned off my phone and went to bed. The next morning, James called. FBI wants a meeting. They've been looking into Ryan and Spencer for months. You're not the first. Just might be the one who helps them crack it. For the first time since that cold, clipped divorce email, I felt something close to satisfaction. Not because the marriage was over, but because the truth was finally clawing its way into daylight. I met with 2 agents, Patel and Donovan, at the Spokane field office. They recorded my full statement, collected every document James and I had gathered. Your case helps establish a pattern, Patel explained. It shows intent, structure, conspiracy, not coincidence. What about Becky? I asked. My ex-wife. The agents traded a look. We're still assessing her level of involvement, Donovan said. Did she mention financial stress? Wanting to sell the house? I thought back. She kept saying we were house poor, pushed the idea of downsizing. Patel made a note. When did that start? About 6 months ago. Probably around the time she met Jeremy. And the refinance? Donovan asked. She never mentioned it. She forged my signature while I was deployed. More questions. More notes. When we wrapped, Patel handed me her card. We'll be in touch. In the meantime, don't engage with your wife or Ryan. We need to build this case clean. Understood. That evening, I drove past the house again. Parked just out of sight. Jeremy's truck was back. Guess he got it out of impound. Becky's car was gone. Then my phone buzzed. A text from her. We need to talk in person. Meet me at Riverfront Park tomorrow. I'll call you in the morning. The next day, over breakfast, I showed James the message. Don't go, he said. Nothing good comes from talking to her now. I won't, I said. But I want to see what she does when she thinks I'm going to. At 9:30 a.m., we parked across the street from the house. Waited. At 9:45, Becky walked out, got in her car, and drove off, headed toward Riverfront Park. James looked over. Now what? I watched her taillights fade down the road. Now we wait. 20 minutes later, a car pulled up, real estate logo on the door. Daniel Spencer. Jeremy stepped outside to greet him. They chatted in the driveway, then disappeared into the house. Should we follow them? James asked. I shook my head. No need. I installed cameras last year, inside and out. Everything uploads to the cloud. James raised an eyebrow. You didn't mention that before. Never came up, I said, pulling out my phone. I opened the security app and turned the screen toward him. There they were, Spencer and Jeremy in the living room. Spencer was snapping photos. Jeremy was pointing things out like it was already his. I tapped the volume icon. Should list by the end of the week, Spencer was saying. Got a buyer lined up, cash as usual. How much? Jeremy asked. $420. We list at $470. They offer $420. Everybody's happy. What about the husband? Becky says he's causing trouble. Spencer waved it off. Military guys are all the same. They make noise, but they've got deployments, responsibilities. He'll settle just to make it go away. I glanced at James. You getting this? He was already recording. Every word. I forwarded access to the live feed to Agent Patel. Added a simple message. Happening now. Half an hour later, unmarked SUVs rolled into the neighborhood, flanked by FBI vehicles. We watched from down the street as agents surrounded the house and led Spencer and Jeremy out in cuffs. My phone rang. Agent Patel. We got them on tape discussing the fraud scheme. That's conspiracy, wire fraud, attempted sale of property under false pretenses. You'll need a formal statement? Yes, she said. And Mr. Briggs, your wife just showed up at the scene. She's distressed. I looked down the block. Becky stood frozen on the lawn, hands over her mouth, eyes wide as agents moved in and out of the house, carrying boxes of paperwork. What happens to her? I asked. That depends, Patel said, on what she knew, and on what you want. I stared at Becky from the distance. 13 years. Some of them good, before it all curdled into whatever this had become. I just want what's right, I said quietly. The federal case moved fast. Jeremy and Spencer both took plea deals, turned on each other fast, dragging a whole network into the light. It wasn't just them. The investigation uncovered a 3-state operation targeting military families. Like mine. Like dozens of others. Becky claimed she knew nothing about the bigger scheme. Said Jeremy had spun lies. That I was hiding money. Planning to leave her broke and forgotten. Said the refinance was his idea, that she just went along with it. Maybe that was true. Maybe not. In the end, she agreed to a settlement. Full restitution of the stolen funds. Forfeiture of any claim to the house or my pension. A signed confession admitting to the forgery. In return, I didn't press charges. 6 months after that email in Kandahar, the divorce was finalized. No fault. Clean break. All things considered, it ended quietly. On the day the last paper was signed, my phone rang. Agent Patel. Jeremy Ryan was sentenced today. 8 years for fraud, conspiracy, identity theft. Spencer got 12. Thought you'd want to know. Thank you, I said. There's more, she added. We found evidence they did this to 11 other military families. Your case helped us connect the dots. Helped them get their money back. After we hung up, I sat on the porch of my rental apartment, watching the sun sink behind the trees, thinking about those other families. Other men who'd gone off to war believing their homes, their marriages, their lives would be there when they returned. I hadn't set out to take down a criminal ring. I just wanted what was mine. But sometimes, the fight you never asked for leads to something bigger than you imagined. My phone buzzed. A text from Becky. I never meant for things to end this way. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. A year later, I sold the house. Couldn't bear to stay. Too many ghosts in the walls. Too much loss soaked into the foundation. I used the money to buy a small cabin outside Missoula. 2 bedrooms. 10 acres. A creek out back and no neighbors for miles. Took early retirement from the Army. 20 years was enough. I'd given all I had. I got a dog, German Shepherd named Scout. Started doing carpentry work for people around town. Fixing porches, building shelves. Nothing fancy, but it kept my hands moving. My pension covered the rest. Sometimes I wondered about Becky. Where she landed, who she'd become. James said she'd moved back to Oregon. Working at another dental office. Starting over, maybe. I didn't hate her anymore. Didn't feel much of anything. She made her choices. I made mine. One evening, I got a letter from a woman in Fort Worth. Her husband was Navy, deployed when Jeremy and Spencer tried the same scheme on her. The FBI had given her my name. You don't know me, she wrote, but you saved our home. Thank you for fighting back when it would have been easier to walk away. I read it twice, then pinned it to my fridge. And on the days when the silence felt too loud, when the memories crept back, I'd look at that letter and remember that something good had come out of all of it. Last I heard, Jeremy and Spencer were still locked up. The system, for once, had worked. And me? I was still here, still building something honest, something no one could forge or steal or lie their way into, something that was just mine.